Vielen Dank, ladies and gentlemen. We'll switch to English for this panel because the German speakers are outnumbered here. We will also have a guest online from across the Atlantic, who's not yet online, Ambassador John Herbst. But for now, I'm very pleased to introduce to you the guests that we have on stage, and I will do this in the order of the distance they have traveled to come here. We have with us Solomiia Bobrovska. She's an MP from Ukraine, from the Verkhovna Rada, from the Holos party, which is in the opposition. She is a member of the National Committee on Security, Defense and Intelligence. She's also a deputy head of the Ukraine delegation to NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Before becoming an MP, Solomiia served as acting governor of the Odessa region. She has a illustrious career in human rights and good governance NGOs, and she's a very vocal and courageous advocate of soldiers. She's a lieutenant in the reserve herself, and she has been very vocal with proposals how to improve Ukraine's mobilization and recruiting system recently. Welcome, Solomiia. Thank you very much. Then from Stockholm, we have Charlotta Rodhe. She's the Deputy Director of the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies at the Swedish Institute for International Affairs. Prior to that, Charlotta has served in several diplomatic roles. She's been the head of the Euro-Atlantic Security Policy Unit at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. And she was also the deputy head of the Swedish mission to the OSCE. Welcome. Then from Copenhagen, we have Flemming Splidsboel Hansen from the Danish Institute of International Studies. His research there focuses on the post-Soviet space, on Russia and Ukraine, and on disinformation most recently. He holds a PhD in international politics from Copenhagen University. He also was an associate professor at that university, and he served as the research director at the Royal Danish Defense College. And we have with us Sara Nanni, who's a member of the German Bundestag from Düsseldorf for the Greens. She's the chairwoman of the Defense Committee in the German Bundestag, and she is the and she is the spokesperson for her parliamentary group on security policy. She has a background in peace and conflict research, and as of next week, you will be an opposition MP, I understand. But this week, she and her party were instrumental in passing and shaping the future spending rules, which will allow the future German government to dig really deep into their pockets on defense spending. And I think we will talk a little bit about, and on Ukraine, thanks to your party's efforts. And we will talk a little bit about them. We are still waiting for our fifth panelist to come online, but I think we will just start. Is he there? He's not there yet. Okay, but I will introduce him nonetheless. We have with us online, and I'm told he can hear us, Ambassador John Herbst, who's the senior director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and a retired US diplomat. He used to be the United States ambassador in Kiev from 2003 to 2006. Before that, he's been ambassador to Uzbekistan. He served as the director of the Center of Complex Operations at the National Defense University, and he is a member of the Center for Liberal Modernity's advisory board. Many thanks for being with us today, tonight for us, this afternoon for you. We're very pleased to have a perspective from across the Atlantic. Our topic for this panel, and we will talk for about an hour before we open up for your questions. You can ask your questions in English or in German. Our topic today will be how can a ceasefire be secured? That is also how can we get to a ceasefire and a new attack from Russia be prevented? And Solomiia, my first question would be to you. Russia isn't exactly famous for sticking to ceasefire agreements. And never.
Not only in Ukrainian history.
We're in a week of new proposals of having a 30-day ceasefire on energy infrastructure, but that is on the background of new attacks. Last night, Odessa, your former workplace, has been severely attacked, again with casualties. My question would be, a ceasefire of this magnitude, it would be incredibly difficult to monitor, and the space for disinformation would be huge. Where do you see the role of Germany and Europe in securing such a ceasefire, or in first maybe in getting there and in dissuading Russia from breaking it? What would be your expectations?
Thank you. First of all, it's my great pleasure to be here. It's always very unusual, and I have very careful feelings how to talk properly to our friends and colleagues in German. We still want to, shape and shake the mood, not only towards Ukraine, but towards Russia and their politics and lifestyle, which they're bringing to Europe as well. Not only to US. I see Ambassador Herbst is with us. I want to be back to what our Minister Kuleba just recently said about victory. Yes, there was one phrase we heard since 2022 behind the scenes with the Ukrainian politician delegations from our NATO allies. So we were told Russia, like Ukraine has not to lose, but Russia has not, like, you don't have to win, but Russia cannot lose, in such way. And our feelings, like we're stuck at that, and ask, like, are you serious? The big war started. How dare you to say this for us? And when you're talking about the ceasefire and all this, I would say noise about the ceasefire, because that's only about the news media, what he said, what she said, how Ukraine feels about that, EU, why they are not in the round table of negotiations and so on. You see the last week, that's the massive attacks of the drones, of Shaheds. Just for the last night, it was 214 Shaheds over in Ukrainian sky. 95 they were struck and shot, but still 19 of them hit their targets in Odessa as well. And I think Odessa just saw the massive attack the most massive attack for the last 3 years. So when we are talking about a ceasefire and in the air, in the sea, on the ground, I bet we cannot talk about the front line, especially. That would be impossible. And you remember probably the OSCE mission, which I'm sorry, but was failed. The special mission, joint mission with Russian, Ukrainians, EU side, which monitored the ceasefire on the front line, and it's failed. It was impossible to catch the Russian hand and to say finally that like you are breaking again the rules. So we are very careful, and I would say we are very angry with all of that which is happening now with the especially US position and their politics towards Ukraine. And I would say that except Russians, probably the US is the most the player which is blackmailing Ukraine as a victim to be the weaker, finally to say that we are weak, so just please accept all the conditions we are putting on the table. Now that's the story. It's what we have in Ukrainian media. That's the story about the control over the power plant stations. But not a joke. It's every time we have to pay for something, for being just alive, or for keeping the security, or of final recognition that you betrayed us 3 years ago when you started to withdraw the American training missions from Ukraine. Then what NATO allies did the same. And they said, okay, the Ukraine is free. You just can start your full-scale invasion, what actually happened in February 2022. But the problem is they didn't count the reality and mentality. Wasn't enough just to give the money to fight always with the corruptions in Ukraine. But the source of corruption, that's Russia. And what are the results of the fighting with Russia in Ukraine is in post-Soviet state, in the Eastern European flank, finally, with the Central and Western European states as well. What we see now, everybody is dealing or with the conventional war as we do this, or with the, I don't like this word, hybrid threats. That's a part of the cognitive war. That's a wider word for what Russia is doing, and hybrid threats, that's only the part of it. So we're just keeping silence, fighting on the front how we can, and trying to find the sources to substitute all the needs we need on the front and to secure Ukraine, starting from the intelligence and up till the ammunition to the front line. And that's the question to our European allies, if they are ready to be the player, the side, to give shoulder and say, okay, we can do that, and we can do it together, because that's that's what I was listening to the previous panel and thinking about this psychological word separation. When you're an adult, finally you have to go leave home, because it's not your parents has to decide what to do. Like Europe, I think can not pretend but be as it used to be, very very serious and not playing with the terms of security and defense. We already, I think, lots of our allies unfortunately lost the time of 3 years. When we were ringing a bell, like, come on, you have to increase the military production. You have to find the sources to have your own intelligence. You can be the next. I understand that the age of my grandparents, they, if they are alive, can remember what happened during the Second World War in the post-Soviet area. Believe me, because that was the regime which was not punished. And now, when we are saying never again, they are saying we are repeating. Not we will repeat, but we are repeating. Because what's happening with the girls and guys in the captivity, for example, or in occupied territories? That's what it's like. You can read in the books of history. That's the same. Just the old methods are the same. That's a KGB style, which is very effective. Probably they don't hold so many conferences, but they just do an act. And that's one of the points we have to finally to respond. That's the speed of actions, but not words. Actions, actions, actions. Respond and respond. If they want, for example, to exclude the Canada or whoever from the Five Eyes Intel community, so you have to be faster with that. You have to respond, okay, we will do this and this and this. It's no longer time, to be relaxed with the new reality. It's time to accept and not to ignore. The new reality just has come. Because Ukraine is like 200 kilometers 25 from the Warsaw. It's a border with Slovakia. Okay, Hungary, that's a question as well. With Slovakia, with this political cycle. Romania and so on. It's too close. It's just behind and in front of your nose and open doors policy.
So let's hear from our European colleagues, how European Union colleagues who are here, how much of a shoulder the European countries can provide in this situation. This is not meant to be a shoulder to cry on, but a shoulder that gives you
To rely on.
that helps you stand up. My next question, Flemming, would be for you, because I think information is going to be crucial in the coming couple of weeks. What do you think will a Russian, I'm going to use a word that you've used in one of your publications, Russian negotiation theater. What will it do to the European public? And what signs of disinformation should we be looking out for?
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. And thank you also to the organizers for inviting me for this great event. Well, first of all, let me say I believe that we're not seeing much of real negotiations. So we hear about negotiations, and maybe our Ukrainian colleague can explain more about this. But when I look at or hear about negotiations taking place in Saudi Arabia, or I hear about telephone conversations between President Trump and President Putin, I suspect, of course, that we are not really seeing negotiations. I was invited for a television program in Denmark to discuss sort of the diplomatic acts behind the telephone conversation between Trump and Putin, and I said I don't buy into the underlying premise of the program, because I don't think that there will be negotiation. I think there will just be a talk, and eventually, of course, they talked about ice hockey, and when we learned that they discussed ice hockey, we knew that this was not a real negotiation. It was just an exchange of pleasantries. So I think this is the first point, that it's not really a hard bargaining. It's not a hard negotiation going on between Russia and the US. But Russia, of course, will attempt to influence. They will attempt to influence our mindset by giving us the impression that the European Union has already been sidelined, that there is no room for the European Union. That the European Union does not have the leverage. The European Union does not have the mentality. The European Union does not have the vision to be involved in this. And this is something that we see already. So this will be presented as what it actually is at the moment, perhaps a Russian-US process. And they will explain that there is no room for the European Union, this for the reasons that I just mentioned. So they will try, of course, to influence this in the way that we perceive ourselves, and some of the things that were discussed in the first panel about agency, the role of the European Union to say, yes, we can actually do this, that we can manage to be involved, we can squeeze our way through the door and insist to have a seat at the table together, of course, with the Ukrainians, which for obvious reasons should be at the table also. So these are some of the issues I'm sure that they will try to bring up.
Sara, Nanni, your party, as we already said, has just shown that things can shift quite quickly under exceptional circumstances. From the process that the German politics went through the last couple of weeks, can you tell us a little bit, enlighten us a little bit, how it actually looks inside when things shift quickly, and maybe also how can we replicate this, that it happens more often and more quickly and more regularly in European politics?
First of all, thanks for having me and to have this talk. I mean, how does it look from inside? A very quick change in German politics was just happening recently after the talk of President Zelensky in the Oval Office. Because I think that up to this point, all the parties that now made the deal on the change of our constitution with the old majority thought that they could wait until the new majority is in power and find some solutions then. I think that after this, I call it Bergamo moment, because we had the same with Corona, when everybody was seeing the dead people of Bergamo and realizing what it means if we are living in a pandemic situation. So the Oval Office was kind of this Bergamo situation also for German politics, and even for the Conservative Party, that maybe they wanted to do something about the finance of our own troops, but they didn't really think of supporting Ukraine and changing the constitution for this. So it's a bitter idea, but we have to see more of this blunt brutalism in diplomacy from Donald Trump in order to keep Europeans alive and acknowledging what is happening, right? So, but I'm sure we're going to see this anyway. So the interesting question at the moment is, does Germany find its role not only in the European Union, but also next to the UK and France and Poland when it comes to form some kind of core alliance from European leaders? Because, I mean, we are not sitting at the table right now because there's no we. And no matter how you define this we, you cannot see a lot of power there. You have two nuclear powers in Europe, France and UK. You have one politically highly committed power, which is Poland. And then you have Germany, where everybody knows that the economic and financial power can be huge. But people are waiting for Germany to get a new government, and then also to define the outlines of its foreign policy vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine. And then maybe we get at the table. But to be honest, I don't really like this table, because I feel like it's a table where 2 out of 3 want capitulation to be negotiated and not ceasefire or peace. So maybe we should build a new table.
Yeah, it does. It does look like a really badly set table at the moment, right? Because as soon as this phone call last Tuesday between Trump and Putin was over, Putin came up with new demands, or old demands repeated on top of a little bit of a concession that so far hasn't materialized. So, Charlotta, maybe you could tell us a little bit what you mean by negotiation theater, and maybe this is the newest performance of negotiation theater, and how not to be distracted by it, but get to the right table with the right people.
Thanks a lot, Simon. I like the premise of your question, and thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be in this group and this audience. I think what we're seeing is exactly as you say. It's a bit of a dance, and it's a dance where Putin and Kremlin, they know the choreography by heart. They have done this before so many times. Because this is the Kremlin playbook. This is what they have used in Georgia, in Moldova, in Ukraine before, obviously, with the Minsk agreements. And you mentioned the OSCE. I think one of the big problems with the OSCE is that the OSCE hasn't actually learned the lessons from everything that went wrong back then in 2014, 2015, and so on. And you really can't expect an organization where Russia has a veto to be part of the solution. It is actually potentially part of the problem, and that is what we have seen in the past. But okay, so we're at this European moment of agency. Flemming mentioned agency, and European agency right now is really either we use it or we lose it. I mean, that's the prospect we have in front of us. And then I think it's extremely important to be careful with words. We talked about these negotiation theater, the peace talks and so on. It's not about peace. It has nothing to do with peace. It's about creating an illusion of negotiation. And why do you want to do that? You want to do that because it's a mind game. It's something that makes us, Sweden, Germany, France, whoever, demandeur for keeping this process that is just ongoing. It's not designed to lead anywhere, at least not to a good place. And for us to start negotiating with ourselves. And I think this is the trap that is being set up for us. It has been set up for us before, and I really hope we will not fall into that trap again. I mean, we talked about European unity, and European unity is difficult today, right? But right now, most European capitals are, so to say, in a full split. Do you know what a full split is? This sort of gymnastic thing where you're really stretching your legs. It's not. I'm not going to demonstrate, Simon. I'm sorry.
Doesn't sound appealing.
I can tell you, it's not a restorative posture. It's a posture where there will be a breaking point, and I'm afraid that breaking point can come pretty soon. This is, of course, a stretch between us standing up for our own interests, our own security, and the fact that we are still, I mean, to different degrees, but we are still dependent on the US and thus the Trump administration. But what do we do when the Trump administration tells us that those sanctions you have, they're actually disturbing my process here? I'm trying to bring peace. What do we do when the Trump administration says, you're talking about these arms deliveries, but maybe you want to step back a little bit because, we shouldn't really escalate? Or what do we do? I mean, right now, Trump has already taken steps away from accountability, which is something that is extremely important in view of all the war crimes and, I mean, the mother of all crimes, the aggression itself. So I think this is when it becomes difficult. This is when our unity will really, really be tested. And this is something that can happen in just a few days. And it's not just, the pressure on that perspective is not only going to come from the Trump administration, it will also come from business interests, for example, in the case of sanctions. And it will come, of course, from the Russian disinformation and information ops. So we have a lot of things to do.
Well, with that, I lead into the next question, which is for Ambassador Herbst. Can you hear as well?
Just fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Perfect. Thanks so much for tuning in.
My pleasure.
We were in desperate need for a little bit of transatlantic orientation through the fog and the distractions of the last couple of weeks already during the first panel. Of course, some of the madness that comes out of the White House seems to be methodological. But at this point, when we talk about security guarantees for Ukraine, should Ukrainians pin any hopes on the US, and should they pin any hopes on the US possessing mines and power plants? Or is that just another distraction? And if so, what else? What are the alternatives? What is available from the current White House for the next 3.5 years? What can Ukrainians still hope from the United States?
Okay. I'm very happy to be here. And this, thus far, is a largely gloomy or an overwhelmingly gloomy conversation. And I understand the gloom. And I think thus far, all of your speakers have as a frame of reference an American administration which is in some fashion withdrawing from the responsibilities taken on internationally since the end of World War II. And that includes backing away from the value component, the morals component of American foreign policy. And given what's happened over the past 7 or so weeks, especially since February 12, the first of the known Putin-Trump phone calls, I understand that point of view. But I don't think that's the only possible way of looking at this. And I'm not sure it's the most realistic way of looking at what we have. And the focus, of course, is overwhelmingly on the policies of the Trump administration. And given his victory in the election last November, the study of this special studies called Trumpology is once again high on the agenda. And so I am a renewed Trumpologist. And here's my take on what's happening. First, Trump's view is not as malign as your speakers suggest. I'm not going to tell you he has a clear, consistent vision for how this will play out. That's not, in my opinion, the way he approaches matters. I think he has instincts, and his instincts are ambiguous, but not necessarily dreadful for Ukraine's future, for European security, and for that matter, for American security. Because I share the view of, I think, everyone who's spoken thus far, that if the picture they paint of Trump's policy is real, America's interests will be savagely damaged. I shouldn't say savagely, I should say substantially damaged. Because the international system that we helped create has been the best guarantor of security, stability that flows from security, and prosperity that's characterized as no other period in human history has experienced. The prosperity and absence of great power war, which has been a great blessing for all of humanity. So what is Trump up to? I believe the following, that Trump's objectives are to end this war quickly, to broker an end to this war. He has in mind not a just peace, but a stable peace, which includes the survival of Ukraine as a sovereign, independent, secure, and economically viable state. And he has put forward in his own less than rigorous fashion the elements to achieve those objectives. He talks about compromises from both Ukraine and Russia. And on the Ukrainian side, we know what those compromises are, which is territory and NATO. And Zelensky, in my judgment, smartly has said he's willing to consider these things or agree to these things in some fashion. And then Trump has also called for compromises on the Russian side in the form of accepting the deployment of European troops, or as Hegseth said a few weeks ago, European and other troops. And the other troops could be a positive or a negative. If you want, we could talk about that. To Ukraine, and substantial Western arms flowing into Ukraine, American among them. And those two measures, which Putin has to accept for this to happen, would make it far less likely that Russia would renew its aggression. And I think that those four elements could lead to a stable peace if they are pursued vigorously and intelligently by the White House. There's been a great deal of talk since the February 12 Putin phone call, and I would describe a great deal of angst since that call, because that's the same day, if you've been following carefully, that in the Oval Office, Trump oversaw the swearing in of Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence. To be diplomatic, not the best choice we've seen in recent years for that position. And that's the point at which Trump announced that he was thinking of as many as 3 meetings with Putin. And when a questioner asked about Zelensky, Trump's answer was famously, well, that's a thought. Not a positive response, obviously. And Zelensky's reaction to the notion of US-Russian talks without Ukraine was understandably negative. And I agree, that's not a good thing per se. But Zelensky's expression of that publicly led to Trump unloading on Zelensky with things that were factually challenged, again, to use a polite formulation, and seemed to suggest that Trump was all about beating up the victim and not going after the aggressor. And we had then a period of, what was it? That was on the 28th of February. And then you had the meeting of, excuse me, that was before the 28th of February. So you had this nasty spat. But it's interesting because this talks about where American policy will ultimately go. During that period, you did not have a majority of Republicans in Congress standing up. You had about a dozen who, while not mentioning Trump, explicitly refuted the many factually challenged things that he said and expressed support for Ukraine. As we all know, Zelensky recovered from that episode where he and Trump were trading public remarks because Trump was and remains deeply interested in Ukraine's rare earth and critical minerals. And that became the vehicle for some sort of temporary, as it turns out, rapprochement with Zelensky angling and getting an invitation to the White House. And then you had what I call the second period of difficulties in the White House bonk of a relationship. Because while it's true that there were 3 people who spoke in that Oval Office meeting, and the person who spoke least objectionably was Zelensky, he did overreach in that meeting because he went on at length making 2 very legitimate points, that A, Putin is untrustworthy, and B, Ukraine needs security guarantees if it's going to survive and ultimately prosper. And while those legitimate points, Zelensky went on for 25 or 30 minutes. And given the way Trump looks at the world, what he was hearing was not legitimate concerns about Putin's intention. What he was hearing was Zelensky's not ready to do a deal. And that's what led to the unpleasant departure of Zelensky from the Oval Office, and even worse, the pause on American military assistance and intel to Ukraine. A serious mistake, in my opinion. It took Zelensky 2 days to realize he had made a mistake. When he did, we were then on the path to getting over this. Zelensky finally sent a sort of apologies 2 days, actually not 3 days later. And then you had the meeting in Jeddah between American and Ukrainian officials. The U.S. proposed a general ceasefire. Zelensky's team said yes. And suddenly everything was more or less fine between Washington and Kyiv. Although I understand why many Ukrainians are unhappy about the policy in Washington that led to this outcome. We all know that Putin did not accept a general ceasefire. We all know that Putin agreed to the ceasefire on energy installations, not, as President Trump posted, energy installations and infrastructure more broadly. We all know that within 2 hours of the quote-unquote command from Putin to his military brass, Russia violated that ceasefire with the attack on Slavyansk. And we all know that Trump and Witkoff spoke in generally positive terms about the Russian response to their proposals. Frankly, a somewhat fatuous evaluation.
Ambassador, thank you very much.
Having said all that, okay. Well, can I just make one last point?
Sure.
Witkoff said, for those of you who think that Trump is selling out Ukraine, that Putin's response relating to arms going to Ukraine is not acceptable to the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much for putting for putting the Oval Office meeting in perspective and for lightening up the gloom a little bit. But I understand that from the panel there are immediate reactions to that. Please, Sara, Nanni.
I mean, we can easily make some kind of war mapping or negotiation mapping and defining what the interest of the different actors are, what the level of power is they have, and the methods they were doing policy in the last years. So, and when I'm looking at the US, and Mr. Herbst, you just said, the United States is still interested in the minerals in Ukraine. But is it important for Trump who owns these minerals? Does it matter for him that these minerals are in control of a democratic Ukraine? Or would he also be happy if Russia just wins the war and then he gets the minerals as well? And I think that we really have to be clear about this. I don't see any power move the United States has done since January 10th towards Russia that would at least slightly improve something for Ukraine, either on the war map nor on the negotiation map. And this is 2 months now where the United States had the chance to prove in their doing that they want something to be done also for Ukraine, and they didn't do a single thing, nothing at all. And to be honest, last year when Donald Trump got elected, people asked me, what does it mean for Ukraine? How bad can it become? And I said, well, one scenario is, and this is what is happening right now, and the other scenario is that Trump really wants to win. He wants to be on the winner's side, and he decides that he could threaten Russia out of Ukraine because the United States would have the capacities to do so, right? Why not blackmail the other side instead of being nuclear blackmailed from Russia for 3 years now, like Biden did, which of course has enormous potential for escalation and dramatic situations in all over Europe. I don't want to glorify this other scenario with the United States, but this would have been another scenario. And nothing happens which is suitable to this scenario. So, and the longer we keep on asking ourselves, how can we deal with the US? What should Europe do in order to make Trump things that are good for Ukraine and for security in Europe? We will just miss the point where we have to step up and be responsible for on security in Europe. And I was also, I'm sorry, but he was talking for a very long time, and I take 2 other minutes maybe. I was also in the Inquiry Commission on Afghanistan for 3 years now. And we had a deep dive as well into the negotiations between the United States and the Taliban when they were not talking to the Republic of Afghanistan, they were not talking to the allies. And really, this is the same playbook. It is absolutely the same. And also the talking is the same. Don't worry. Don't worry. We take care. We want Afghanistan to be a sovereign state that can fulfill its own security needs on its own, blah, 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 blah. We just also want to go out, right? And this is the same thing that is happening right now. So the talking is about peace and finding a solution for Ukraine. But the most important motive for Trump is just to go out, because it's very costly for the United States. And he doesn't see why it's important for him, so he wants to get out. And as long as we don't understand this motive, we can just make wrong decisions in Europe.
Thank you. I want to take this back more to the topic of security guarantees, especially also because the ambassador said that that was the sticking point during this Oval Office conversation, that demanding security guarantees, which are really hard to get from the United States, apparently, it was what led to this ugly scene. Now, Solomiia, I know that for many Ukrainians, even those who are not party goers of President Zelensky, that was the optics and the symbolism of that conversation was very painful, and maybe you could, and it shocked Europeans into action. That was the Bergamo moment. So to move on, from that ugly scene, we should perhaps now talk about Europeans' reactions since then and the perspective of Europeans taking on a greater role in Ukraine. If that, if there was one positive outcome of that, then that was it. So, Solomiia, could you walk us through a little bit of, from the perspective of a Ukrainian MP, how would a European presence, military presence in Ukraine look? How realistic is it, and how would it interact with the Ukrainian military?
No, first of all, just a small comment on what the Ukrainian reaction on what happened in the Oval Cabinet. It was disgusting. It was ugly. It was a humiliation of Ukrainian dignity. It wasn't not only about Ukrainian President Zelensky. It was about Ukrainian nation which is fighting actually and paying a price. And paying the price for values and freedom, which U.S. tried to spread and to tell how to share these values, and to keep them. And especially the comment about the suit and how the J.D. Vance watched the stories probably somewhere in Instagram or TikTok about the war. It was really a shame. And the total Ukrainian reaction was probably the same as I'm just telling you here now. And what I just heard from Ambassador Herbst, that Trump or America is interested in keeping Ukrainian peace and stable peace, but Russians want the same. And it's interesting, U.S. want to control the minerals, power plant station, whatever. We have to pay for the security, and so on and so on. So that's endless points and list of things Ukraine should do. But my question is, what Russia will do? They will just stop on the front line. They will freeze. They will stop their shadow mobilization. Do you know that they have very clear plan for this year with the mobilization, A, B, with their next offensive operation in Ukraine, with the buffer zones starting from the north up till the south. Don't forget about not only Donetsk region and Luhansk region, but about Zaporizhia and Kherson, which is partly occupied, and they will continue. So what Russia will do? We're talking about what we should do, what what Europe has to do, and so on. That's our domestic with things. But the conditions, and the question is about the conditions of this ceasefire or the peace agreement or this so-called stable peace. Because we as Ukrainians understand, and probably our eastern flank neighbors understand, they know for sure, because that's about the knowing Russian style and mentality. Their threat will be just endless, and we have to be prepared. It's our existential war for being on the map, on political map as a state. And that really cost for us where they will stop, in Sumy region, in Dnipro, or they will just cut the part of Ukraine in 10 years, for example, according to the Dnipro River, which divides Ukraine on the left shore and right shore. Like, why we don't talk about what Russia will do? And when we're talking about security guarantees, it's obvious. The first thing, that's a political thing, that's a NATO membership, which depends on, first of all, on US position. I think that's very clear and obvious what they will tell us now. The second one, if we're talking about the combined efforts with the Ukrainian and European army, okay, if you are not ready to come to Ukraine with your brigades, let's combine with your air defense missions. Why not to make the common shield? That's the preparation for all pilots and air forces. We asked that since last summer. let's help us with the western Ukrainian border, so we can give our patriots and our this ammunition closer to Odessa or to Sumy or to Kharkiv. No, we cannot do this. Please bring back your training missions. No, like we can do together joint operations and missions on the Black Sea, because it's not the Black Sea only belongs to Russia and Turkey. That's the NATO Black Sea as well, with the allies on the Black Sea. Like, why we don't look not only on the land component and stressing on that? Why we don't think about the others one? Which that's a part of, that's the dimensions of the war. I think that would be very yes, it's very challenging. But again, if you are if you want to sit on the table, if you pretend to be an adult, freedom is not free.
Freedom is not free, and Europe has maybe moved a little bit in showing that it can take over more costs. I'm looking to you, but we're not sure yet about the risks. You know, whether we're also ready to overtake these risks that are involved. Maybe Charlotta, to you, the question: is there anything what has come out of the discussions of the last weeks, troop presence, coalition of the willing, without the United States, without NATO, that could impress Russia and get to a place where Solomiia wants them to have, where, you know, where we can ask them, what can you do? And where they need to make concessions. How do we impress the Russians? How do we go from here?
No, thank you. I will quote somebody I immensely respect who said that if we're afraid enough, we can do anything. The question is whether we are afraid enough, and I hope we are, and I hope we will actually be able to do all these things. And I mean, we need to think outside of the box now. I mean, the Sky Shield, the peacekeepers, and so on. But let me just say 2 other points. Every time that we have rewarded Russian aggression historically, you know, by giving them a little bit, maybe not everything they wanted, but, you know, we have been looking for stability, we've been looking for de-escalation. It has turned out to actually be escalatory. It has turned out to lay the groundwork for the next aggression. And the next aggression has always been more serious. And I think this is something that we need to keep in mind at all times when we deal with this. On security guarantees, I thought I could share a little bit sort of a Swedish experience.
Please do.
So, Sweden has now, of course, a couple of weeks ago, it was 1 year that we have been in NATO, enjoying the protection of Article 5, now with some question marks maybe, but let's not go there. But the process for us was really not that simple. I mean, there was a strong impetus, of course, with the beginning of the full-scale invasion, but the very reluctant Swedish politicians, they were really looking at all potential possibilities to get security guarantees without joining NATO, which they didn't want to do. And over and over and over again, people explained to us there are no other security guarantees than NATO's Article 5. It doesn't exist. It doesn't work. I mean, the only one we can think of in that case is going nuclear, and that was not an option, of course. So I think the experience that we had shows that anything else than NATO membership, anything else than Article 5 is really a plan B, plan C. I mean, joining NATO, that's cheap and relatively easy in terms of providing security. Everything else is going to be messy, difficult, expensive, a little bit here, a little bit there, and potentially a lot less effective. But if that's where we are, we just need to get out of the box and we need to look at all the possible options, including, I would say, rethinking the EU, rethinking 42.7, I mean, absolutely. Today, it's not working as a security guarantee. But if we can make it credible, in the future, it might. That also requires a lot of thinking outside of the box, of course.
Maybe you want to respond to the same question as well.
Yes, thank you. I would love to. The conversation, of course, has taken an unexpected turn, and I think that's very welcome. So we don't just confirm each other. But I have to say, the view that was presented from the U.S. is in stark contrast to what I see, at least, and my understanding of European politics. We need to remember that Donald Trump was inaugurated 2 months and 1 day ago, and the consequences, the effect of his presidency on transatlantic relations also, of course, have been devastating. So when I look at those 2 months in relation to Ukraine, I do not see anything that seems to indicate that the Trump administration would be willing to put any pressure on the Russian side. We have absolutely nothing. We have a few statements concerning an increasing military support to Ukraine, and we have a statement concerning possible new sanctions against Russia, but there's nothing to indicate that they will actually materialize. I see a concerted effort to marginalize Ukraine, to marginalize the Ukrainian president. And when we hear from the intervention that Zelensky made a mistake, he apologized 2 days later, I need to object. He did not make a mistake. He misread the situation because of the Trump presidency, because of Trump and J.D. Vance. He misread the situation. I had a meeting yesterday with a Secretary General from a foreign ministry of one of the EU/NATO member states. And we discussed the meeting, and the advice from the Secretary General was no politician should go to the Oval Office now unless it's absolutely needed. And this is just a quality of the relations. This is a quality of the atmosphere that you will find in the office. Zelensky did not make a mistake. He apologized 2 days later because he realized that in order to please Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, he would need to apologize. So in order to please them, this is the level that we are at. And when I look at European politics, when I look at the debate in Denmark, where of course we have the separate issue, which is Greenland, which is very different from Ukraine, but still bears resemblance to it. So the US, as you will know, has threatened to take over Greenland. Donald Trump suggested we do not have a legal right to Greenland, which mirrors some of the Russian talk about Eastern Ukraine. For instance, Danish-Greenlandic relations were established in 1380. And it's well known and is recognized by the US. So the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Denmark is recognized by the US, but it's still brought up. And it has caused a tectonic shift in European politics. So this may be the view from the US, but it's definitely not the view that is shared across the European political landscape. We are at a very, very different situation now. Now, when it comes to deterrence, because this is what we're discussing, what we have tried to do now for 2 months, actually a bit more, before the inauguration, is that we decided to step up defense spending. Our plan A was to tell the Americans, look, we will spend more money. We hope you will still love us. Or we will spend more money to show that we will still love you. And then we hope that you will still love us back. There's a clear realization this is not happening. So our plan A is already now our plan B, which is that we need to take care of ourselves because the US is not going to support us. It's not even that. It may be even worse, that the US will undermine our efforts to reach a fair peace in Ukraine, to solve the conflict in Ukraine, and to continue strengthening of the European Union, for instance, as we heard in the first panel. So we need to take care of ourselves. So basically, we're looking at a European deterrence. And can we do that? Yes, we can, if we really want to. We can put together a deterrent force which can act as a substitute for a full NATO force but it takes, of course, a lot of time, and we need to discuss the very sensitive and controversial issue of the French nuclear umbrella, because it is a nuclear umbrella which will have to be extended to all of us. But President Macron, of course, has already raised this issue. He's leading from the front, and he's trying to show the way where we could do this without the US, because he recognizes also where we stand.
Ambassador Herbst, I will let you respond to that in a minute. So we're speaking of a deterrence-based future for Europe, which now, Flemming, you said that this would be in addition to NATO, or my question then would be, where does that leave NATO? And of course, with the United States at the moment being in such a dominant place within NATO with its capabilities and it's also its dominance of the command structure within NATO, Ambassador, what would that do to NATO if the Europeans are now full steam ahead trying to create an alternative deterrence-based future for Ukrainian and European security?
First, I apologize if I spoke too much the first time. I will try to be briefer now.
It
But
was my job to stop
this-
you, and I didn't, because the hall was transfixed and everybody was listening to you because we were thirsty for clarification from Washington.
Okay.
But this time you only have 5 minutes, because then we have to open
Okay.
the hall.
Okay, look, I think it would be a very good thing for Europe, for the United States, for Europe to further develop its defense capability. I think it's absolutely essential. And I don't think it will complicate relations between the United States and Europe under Trump. I think it will actually improve them in some fashion. Now, so many things have been said. I'm going to deal with what I think are the most important things. First, my view is idiosyncratic. I try and see things as they are. Not so easy, because views in the United States are polarized to a substantial extent. And most commentators share views very much like everyone who's spoken on this panel, with the exception of me, that they think that Trump is in the process of selling out Ukraine. I don't think so. I don't think he's made up his mind. I can explain why, but that might take by itself 3 to 4 minutes, which I don't have. So if people want to ask me about that during question period, please do. But here's a fact. First of all, because you're so gloomy, you say things which are not factually accurate. Trump, in fact, has taken a serious step against Russia. Bessent, his Treasury Secretary, a few hours before Putin's inadequate response to the general ceasefire proposal, removed the one waiver that Biden put in place on sanctions against Russian hydrocarbon. That was a significant step, a clear blow against the Russian economy. So that's point one. Point two, it's in Trump. Trump has stated his interest beyond achieving, again, a stable peace is to receive a Nobel Peace Prize. Now, I think the animus against him is so strong, even if he produced a brilliant peace outcome, he might not get that prize. But for sure, if he brokers the deal which enables Putin to take over Russia in the future, he will be scorned by contemporaries and in history as one of the worst American foreign policy presidents ever. He would be seen as Putin's poodle, and he definitely does not want to be seen that way. But that does not mean he could head in the wrong direction, because he's transactional. As for the minerals, it's a good thing for Ukraine, and for that matter, now the nuclear power plants, that Trump is interested in that. Given his transactional view of the world, which is most definitely not mine, that's the reason for him to make sure that Ukraine survives. And to say that, well, Trump won't care if he gets his rare earths from Russia or from Ukraine, no, that's not true. If Trump himself does not understand, his advisors do, that if we are dependent on Russia for rare earths and critical minerals, that's like being dependent upon China. And we're trying to free ourselves from dependence on China. If we get substantial portion of our mineral needs satisfied by a free and independent Ukraine, that is in America's security and economic interest. We don't want to be dependent on Putin or his successor for access to such necessary components of a modern economy and a modern military. Last point. Someone said correctly that the deal that Putin engineered on Afghanistan was a bad deal, not because the terms were bad, but because when the Taliban, while Trump was still in power, began to violate them, Trump, did not take strong measures against. And so the notion that we might see a similar play with Ukraine and Russia is a legitimate one. And I can't tell you it's wrong. But I can tell you that you cannot be sure that it's right. And again, I'll finish my comments here. If someone in the audience wants me to explain that, I'll be happy to do that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. At this point, we will open the floor for questions. You can ask your questions in German or in English. Please wait until one of my colleagues comes to you with a microphone. Then please briefly introduce yourself and ask a brief question. We will close this panel very punctually at 5:30 because our panelists all have to catch planes or trains or buses to go wherever they need to go. Hopefully nobody travels to London Heathrow. Then we would have all night to discuss. Questions, please. Lady in the lila.
Maria Khaleti, International Diplomacy Initiative. My question is actually about guarantees from Russia. A lot of discussions about guarantees from the Western partners, but there's no discussion about guarantees from Russia. What do you think guarantees Russia should provide Ukraine to encourage Ukraine to negotiate peace agreement with Russia? Second question is about concessions. It's also, we've heard a lot of discussions about concessions which Ukraine shall make, but there's no discussion, at least clear discussion, which concessions should Russia do to conclude the agreement with Ukraine and to stop the war. Thank you.
And I forgot to say, you would also have to say who you direct your question to. That would be best.
I think it can be for all panelists, but also for Ukrainian.
Who wants to respond?
Start, but I think that's the guarantees from Russia. That's a phenomenon which doesn't exist. That's a problem. The only force they can understand. That's why I said about the NATO membership and the real military force on the Ukrainian soil. Probably Russian fleet. Yes, it can play still a role, but it's a financial track. But who are from the Eastern European states? They know for sure that only force, real force, which can be stronger than Russian, and then can not only react but act, can make Russia just to keep their appetite a bit with themselves to stay. You saw since 2014 what guarantees from Russia we received and how they acted on the front line, which was frozen under, again, OSCE mission and common and joint mission from Russia and Ukraine.
Who else wants to respond to that question? Perhaps Ambassador Herbst?
Okay. I think I partly answered this already. Russia needs to accept two measures which would make it much harder for Russia to achieve, or for Putin to achieve, his objective. His objective is the effective political control of Ukraine. And to achieve that, he needs to take Kharkiv, Odessa, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and of course, Kyiv, and leave Ukraine a smallish rump state, landlocked, no access to the Black Sea. That's his objective. And that's obviously, if he accepts a European force, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a second, and serious arms to Ukraine, he's not going to be able to achieve that. Now, when I say European force, in fact, I think the single greatest bright spot over the past 2 months has been the stepping up by first Macron and Starmer, but now others, to seriously put in place plans to deploy Europeans to Ukraine. The Europeans need an American backstop. That's the term of art today, and that's absolutely right. There are three components to that backstop, two relatively easy for the United States to give. The third one we have to give, but I'm not sure that's easy to get. The two easy ones are American intel and American equipment, or more broadly, American logistics. The third one is a guarantee to our European allies and partners on the ground in Ukraine that when the Russians provoke them by shooting at them, the Americans will join in shooting back. I don't see Trump agreeing to that tomorrow, but if that becomes the final piece needed to make his own plan for Europeans to deploy to Ukraine, it's possible to achieve. And again, if this were to actually happen, I think it's highly unlikely that Putin goes farther to wherever the lines are when a ceasefire or a peace deal is reached.
I want just to say that Nobel Prize award in December. So
Sorry?
we are waiting for American troops, not tomorrow, but in summer, autumn. Till December we have time.
I personally, oh, by the way, I chaired a group with the names of people you would know, like Phil Breedlove and Sandy Vershbow, that put out a paper, just a short paper, so it's easy to go. Well, it's turgid language, but it's only 3 pages, put out by the U.S. Ukraine Foundation on Tuesday, on how this deployment could work. Thank you.
Sara, you want to respond to this?
I mean, again, we have to take a step back maybe and look at the map, the negotiation map. And at the moment, Putin has a huge interest in using these so-called negotiations in order to weaken Ukraine's military force. But they don't have any interest in finishing talks that leads to a situation where Russia has to pull out people from Ukrainian territory. I mean, the most simple question, what is he going to do with all those 100,000 veterans coming back to Russia, becoming alcoholics, criminal, beating up their families, having no jobs? This would be a massive destabilization for Russian society. So why should Putin do that? And if we are not dealing with the realistic analysis of the actors we have at the table, we cannot fully understand what kind of table that is. And as well, I mean, I really want to believe that in the United States, there are still a lot of political leaders and political analysts and foreign policy people who are working on a better United States, but you can also see what is happening inside of the United States. I mean, it becomes a more and more authoritarian country. The leadership is becoming more and more important, and the leadership at the moment is Donald Trump, so his interests are even more important than the interests of President Biden was in the last administration. And if you putting all of this together, where does this lead us? It doesn't lead us anywhere. And I really think that we have to be honest with ourselves about this, because otherwise we would just lose time in order to take the right decisions.
More questions, please.
Thank you. I have one comment and one short question. Thank you for all the praise for Poland. Of course, I mean, every praise is welcome. But I have a bad news. We don't have this largest army in Europe yet. We didn't buy 500 pieces of HIMARS launchers. We didn't ramp up the munition production. Actually, we are at 50,000 155 per year, which is probably for a week of a proper fight. And in terms of F-35 aircraft, we have 2, all of them in the United States. So Poland is making a lot of effort, but it has made only baby steps in what is a marathon. My question to you is, based on that and based on the need to deter and defend eastern flank, especially the northeastern quarter of it, how about this idea, which has been floated for some time, about creating some kind of Nordic-Baltic alliance within the alliance? Thank you.
You taking the microphone, Flemming?
Well, I'm very motivated because the NB8, Nordic Baltic 8, sometimes we include the Poles and we also include the Germans, of course, is very promising. And I know that our politicians attach great value to this. And actually, I mentioned it was a lunch meeting yesterday with the Secretary General, so head of Foreign Ministry, and this individual was actually attending an NB8 meeting in Copenhagen. So it's something which is, it has always been important, and we've had for many years military cooperation, NORDEFCO, but it has acquired a new importance and a new significance. So this is definitely something that will be explored, and I see personally, but also sort of analytically, great potential. So the potential could be within the NB8, Nordic Baltic 8, and that includes, of course, the Nordic states, including Norway and Iceland, and the Baltic states. And then, as I said, sometimes we meet in a different configuration, and we include the Poles, and we also include the Germans, or you include us. It's not that we invite you, but it's just a different configuration. And this is something which has crystallized, of course, with the entry into NATO of both Finland and Sweden, and with the full-scale invasion. And so when you look at the political developments now within both NATO and the European Union, and we shouldn't congratulate ourselves too early, of course, but you will find that there is a lot of dynamic thinking and processes in, and I'm not going to mention my own country, but let's just say Finland, Sweden, absolutely, Poland also. So this will be a very, very important region, I'm absolutely certain, as a sub-region within NATO and perhaps even within the European Union.
Maria has a question.
Thank you. I want to be a little nasty towards you European guys, or towards us European guys, I would say. We all know that we really did very, very little in military spending in most of our European countries as members of NATO, and that the United States guaranteed our safety with much more spending than we ever did. Now we have war in Europe. The victim is being represented there, Solomiia. Europe was not really strong and convinced to go all in. It was not all in. It was standing with Ukraine, never all in or whatever it takes. And now we get a nasty American president, fits very well into the picture of many leftist German Europeans, that this American country, when it was Pax Americana, was not really very sympathetic. And now this president is, to a certain extent, stepping back and says, well, you didn't deliver, so I'm going to talk to Putin and we will go into negotiations. So, to be honest, when I listen to you, John, yes, I think, well, that isn't possible, that he says that it was a mistake what Zelensky said, and well, but do we really have the right to be so excellent in our principles and keeping them up, while we have been far from really doing practical steps to give Ukraine what it needs? And from what I understand, even if we decide different now, it still will take a lot of time, because we will not be able to speed up that fast. So I give this back to you, John, and maybe you can pick it up again and tell us that it's very good when Europe sticks to the principles, but that we really have to look at a very, very bitter situation on the ground, which has been created by us also.
Well, thank you. I think we have from the podium we have one response to that. Charlotta, and then Ambassador Herbst, if you have an opinion on this votum as well.
No, thank you, Marie-Louise, for raising this. I think it's not nasty. It's actually very fair. If there's one thing that the MAGA movement has been saying that I can fully subscribe to, is that it's a little bit ridiculous when Europeans say, "Oh, this problem is existential to us," but we're not actually behaving and treating it as an existential problem. So, you know, of course, ideally, this would happen in a more orderly fashion. But, you know, at the end of the day, we're in a situation where we're forced to do the right thing that we should have done ages ago. When it comes to the military spending and the principles and so on, I think, I mean, just a little nuance, I think it's important to understand. I mean, now we're all actually stepping up our military spending, and we are taking this responsibility because the safe bet is that the US is simply not going to be around and might even be, you know, not only neutrally not really caring, but might actually take steps that are detrimental to our security interests. The problem is that, for example, when it comes to the support to Ukraine, we need to not only maintain our support, we need to not only maintain our support and replace US support, we need to maintain our support, replace US support, and add the extra that we've been talking about for years that would actually bring Ukraine to victory. So this is the order that we're dealing with. And finally, on the principles, I mean, I see your point absolutely. Maybe it's you know, it sounds lofty to talk about principles, but we don't do that to sound lofty or because it's nice or because it's in our genes or whatever. We do that because it's about our security, and there's not really an alternative to doing that. So, thank you.
Ambassador, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. First, you know, Marie-Louise, you and I have been basically partners since within 6 months of the Russian invasion of Crimea when we first met. Over the last 10 plus years, tearing our hair out because of inadequate policies throughout Europe and Washington as well. Even today, as I said, the brightest light in the past 2 months has been Europe starting to step up on the security side. But the step up is still not wonderful because you're talking about 3+% spending on defense and really kicking your industry, your military industry, into fast production, and we're not seeing that. And since I'm an equal opportunity critic, even the Trump team talks about the need for us to arm up for China, but they've taken no strong steps to increase American military production, which is necessary, even if they were going to toss Ukraine to Russia, which, as I've already said, we should not expect. You need to be ready for it, but you not think that that's actually what's going to happen. If we're going to, it would be actually relatively easy to achieve not a stable peace, but a just peace. If the United States and Europe were to arm Ukraine the way we should have been arming Ukraine since the big invasion began. That could happen tomorrow, but Trump doesn't seem to understand that, and European leaders don't have the capacity to do it. They have the money to do it, but you need to be able to get the arms, which we need not just what you produce yourself, but from the United States and maybe from a few other places like South Korea. But that would be, if I were in charge of policy, that's what I'd be trying to achieve. But sadly, that's not what decision makers in Washington are looking for right now. And even in Europe, I don't know how serious the effort is, although I do believe it's a good faith effort to get those troops into some form of configuration to head to Ukraine.
There's a question in the audience.
Matthias Nellis with the German-Ukrainian Bureau. First of all, congratulations to LibMods for bringing in the Scandinavic, Nordic and Baltic voices. It's really refreshing. We don't have them enough in our German discourse, and that your voices matter to the Germans sometimes more than our own voices or the Ukrainian voices. So obviously your support has been exemplary in many regards, and some of that we talked about today, but I wanted to ask you, what of that support, like the Danish model in investing in the Ukrainian defense industry, could be scaled up? What are your lessons that you want the Germans to take from you? There's a Norwegian model, and there are certain capabilities that the Swedes have in terms of jets, the Gripens, because we're talking ultimately the foundation for any security guarantee is the Ukrainian army, and you are investing into Ukrainian defense industry, and we could and should do more. So what are your lessons on that you're willing to share with us? Thank you.
You want to start from the end, Flemming, with the
Yes,
Danish model?
Well, thank you for this. And it's great, of course, now we have a Danish model. I'm not sure what... I mean, I should start by saying that we don't have our own production. And we have now tried for 3 years to put our own production together, and nothing is happening. So there's not much you can learn from us when it comes to that. We're much better at paying others to do it. And that's what we've done in Ukraine. And this is the Danish model, which our experience is quite positive. The idea is that we provide funding for Ukrainian manufacturers to produce on site. And we heard on some of this from Kubilius also in the first panel. It makes sense. It's on the ground. It's where it's happening. It's high quality, and it's cheaper than producing in Denmark if we had the capacity, which unfortunately we do not. So it's a very novel idea, and it's a courageous idea, and I think it's mainly a mental leap. It's also of course an assessment that Ukraine is a proper place to do this. That this is safe now for us to invest in this also, and it is. And so the Danish model is being celebrated in Denmark in particular. It's being viewed as a bold step, which addressed an acute problem, which is that we cannot produce ourselves. I hope we will be able to soon. The Danish public hopes so. But we solve the part of the problem by delegating this to the Ukrainians themselves. But I'm very pleased with your question. Now, when I return home, not tonight, but maybe on Monday, I should start a small study on this, because it is actually quite interesting, and maybe try to collect some of the experiences from the various ministries that we have on how they have dealt with this.
And I think Sweden, Finland, and Iceland, they took the same. They took this experience to join this Danish model to invest, and of course join production in Ukraine, if not Danish model. So everyone is welcome, and that's the policy of the government, of the president, of members of parliament, actually, at all overall. One thing I just want to argue and say about the ammunition which we received from the US, and that's why EU states and any type of model can work. Only 1/3 of ammunition we received for the needs of the front line from the US. So it means if we are together, we can be not strong only in our phrases and speeches and messages, but in reality on the front line, and that would be the best response to this new style of American policy.
Are there more questions? We can take one more. There's one in the back. Somebody wearing black.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Snezhana Pushkar. I'm Ukrainian, and now I'm in Germany as a refugee for the last couple of months. And my question is as follows. Without doubt, and this was the discussion today. The military support is crucial for Ukraine, and I'm really happy to hear all the thoughts shared today and this common understanding on how important it is for Ukraine. But what do you think, and what could be done in the security, informational security, and what we can do against Russian narratives, taking into account that this country was caught by manipulating or influencing both US elections and the last elections in Germany. And what should we do? What should be our first steps to defend not only Ukraine, but the whole Europe and democratic world? Thanks.
So I'm going to be in the opposition soon. So I feel this freedom of speaking beyond the official party line already coming up inside of me. I think really we should close X and close TikTok. That's the first thing we should do. And in all of the European Union. And then we really should also take care of what we already have. Because the one measures are those that you take in order to prevent that it get worse, but you also have to acknowledge the good things we already have in our information environment here in Europe. And I want to invite every one of you who has a bit cash every month to really buy a lot of newspapers. Because, I mean, people could laugh about it, but journalists are not paid by love and air, right? Especially those ones that have to make research on deeper problems, connections between Russia and Germany, and the economics, and the politics, and the administration, and so on. Those people who work on these issues, they spend a lot of time, and then they have one article after 2 months or so, right? And it's clicked several thousand times maybe. They need money to do that. So if you have some money left, please invest in our force power, like we say in Germany, of our democracy. This is so important. And I think then we have a chance, at least, to stay a democracy where truth matters.
I'm going to close it here with this very clear advice for you to subscribe to a newspaper and go out of TikTok. Close it down. But you getting off would be a first step, maybe, but not enough. Thank you very much for a very controversial discussion, everybody who came here. Thank you very much, Ambassador Herbst, for complicating our European perspective a little bit. We're very good on time, and now we will have a wrap-up from Ralph and Marie. Before then, we close the conference. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a safe trip home, everybody.
I'll be brief. Okay. So förmlich wollte ich es gar nicht machen. Vielen Dank. Ich will nur kurz 5 Punkte aus der Diskussion gerne für mich und vielleicht auch für Sie mitnehmen. Das Erste, worüber diskutieren wir, wenn wir jetzt über die Verhandlungen zwischen Putin und Trump sprechen und vielleicht auch künftig mit Europäern. Ich glaube, wir sollten uns und anderen gegenüber klar sein, dass es nicht um Frieden geht, einen Frieden, der diesen Namen wirklich verdient. Mit dem jetzigen russischen Regime gibt es keinen Frieden im Sinne einer konstruktiven Zusammenarbeit und einer partnerschaftlichen Koexistenz. Worum es alleine gehen kann, sind die Bedingungen für einen Waffenstillstand in der Ukraine. Das Zweite, ich fand die Diskussion sehr interessant mit Botschafter John Herbst, vielleicht auch ein bisschen irritierend. Finde aber notwendig, dass wir unterschiedliche Sichtweisen zur Kenntnis nehmen über die Motive und Absichten der Trump-Administration, soweit man sie überhaupt enträtseln kann und man es nicht sozusagen mit einer völlig erratischen Politik zu tun hat, deren Hauptmerkmal ihre Unberechenbarkeit ist. Aber ich halte es doch mit der Conclusio aus dem ersten Panel, dass wir nicht zu viel über Trump spekulieren sollten. Das Wichtigste ist für die Europäer, die eigene Position zu klären und ins Handeln zu kommen. Ja, also uns nicht abhängig zu machen von dem, was aus den USA kommt oder nicht kommt, sondern die eigene Stärke zu entwickeln. Und zwar so schnell wie möglich mit Blick auf die Ukraine. Ja, wir reden viel über die künftige europäische sicherheitspolitische Souveränität und vielleicht einen künftigen europäischen nuklearen Schirm. Aber ich glaube, Kuleba hat es gesagt in der ersten Runde, die Entscheidung über den Ausgang des Krieges in der Ukraine fällt vermutlich in den nächsten Monaten. Das heißt, es gibt eine enorme Dringlichkeit und es kommt auf Geschwindigkeit des Handelns an. Das Dritte, Waffenlieferungen an die Ukraine und Sanktionen gegen Russland müssen aufrechterhalten und verstärkt werden. Das ist der einzige Weg, einen Frieden oder einen Waffenstillstand, jedenfalls einen stabilen und nachhaltigen Waffenstillstand zu erreichen. Und der Druck muss auf Russland ausgeübt werden und nicht auf die Ukraine. Das ist ja eine perverse Verkehrung, die da stattgefunden hat, dass jetzt hauptsächlich die Ukraine dafür verantwortlich gemacht wird, ob es zu einem Ende dieses Krieges kommt und nicht der Aggressor. Der vierte Punkt ist, ich hoffe, dass Andreas Kubilius recht hat und ich bin da auch nicht ganz so skeptisch, vielleicht sogar weniger skeptisch als zu Beginn unserer Diskussion, dass dieser Krieg für Europa auch ein Katalysator ist für einen großen Schub nach vorne im Hinblick auf unsere sicherheitspolitische Handlungsfähigkeit und die Herausbildung einer europäischen Verteidigungsunion. Darum geht es im Kern. Eine europäische Verteidigungsunion, gern innerhalb der NATO. Und gleichzeitig glaube ich nicht, dass die EU in ihren jetzigen Strukturen dafür schnell genug handlungsfähig ist. Das heißt, wir brauchen unbedingt eine Coalition of the Willing, die auch außereuropäische Länder einschließt, zum Beispiel Großbritannien. oder Norwegen, vielleicht sogar Kanada. Und zwar sowohl kurzfristig mit Blick auf Unterstützung der Ukraine, wie im Hinblick auf mögliche Garantien für einen Waffenstillstand mit einer robusten militärischen Präsenz in der Ukraine. Ich sehe nicht, dass das eine EU-Präsenz sein wird, sondern dafür braucht es eine Allianz von Staaten, die dazu bereit und in der Lage sind und zu denen hoffentlich dann auch Deutschland gehören wird. Ich bin vielleicht ein bisschen zuversichtlicher als Marie, was die Handlungsfähigkeit der Europäer angeht. Bei aller Kritik an unserer Zögerlichkeit in den letzten 3 Jahren. Aber ich denke, es gibt doch viele Indikatoren, dass etwas in Bewegung gekommen ist. Und dass wir uns nicht festhalten sollten an der Beschreibung der Schwäche, der Verwundbarkeit, der Krisenhaftigkeit, sondern dass wir die Elemente stärken müssen, die jetzt eine neue europäische Entschlossenheit bewirken können. Und der Beschluss, der mit kräftiger Mithilfe der Grünen im Bundestag getroffen worden ist, sowohl für die Stärkung unserer Wirtschaftskraft, Investitionen in die Modernisierung der Infrastruktur, wie in die Aufstockung unserer Verteidigungsfähigkeit, ist dafür doch ein Schritt in die richtige Richtung. Genauso wie die europäischen Programme, von denen Andreas Kubilius gesprochen hat. Also ich gehe schon mit einem Moment von Zuversicht aus dieser Konferenz heraus, dass die Dinge in Bewegung kommen. Und klar ist, dass Europa nur politisch etwas zu sagen haben wird, wenn wir diese Krise jetzt nutzen. Und ich hoffe, dass die Diskussion heute vor allem, es war ja eine Diskussion über im Grunde unsere eigene Agenda, was wir jetzt tun müssen, worauf wir uns verständigen müssen als Deutsche und als Europäer. Und ich hoffe, dass wir einen kleinen Impuls jedenfalls geben konnten für die nächsten Monate. Vielen Dank. Nochmal vielen Dank an unser Team. Vielen Dank an die Übersetzerin. Und vor allem vielen Dank für Sie, das Publikum, für Ihre Beiträge, für Ihr Interesse. Das wird nicht die letzte Diskussion gewesen sein. Dankeschön.